My name's Nate Granzow. I'm from Buffalo, Minnesota, and I am the author of the Phaistos Paragon.
And I'll even try and come up with some new questions.
Sure, throw me some curveballs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's we'll try and attack it a little bit from a different direction.
Sure.
But, so there was some point in time, whether it was in grade school or something, when you even thought about the concept of who wrote this, why did this get written? I could write something. Do you remember ever having any of those epiphanies when you were a kid?
I remember reading Jeff Shera's works, Michael Shera and Jeff Shera, and they wrote a series that they were essentially based in the Civil War, and he fictionalized the dialogue and some of the interactions between various generals on both sides. But I remember being just absolutely fascinated and taken with their writing style and thinking, you know what, maybe I'll try my hand at writing some short fiction in that same vein, based in the Civil War. And from there it sort of blossomed into, you know, if you can do that, you could clearly write about anything that you take a liking to. And I was an avid consumer of all kinds of fiction growing up, and the writing just seemed a natural segue from there.
Do you remember the first time that you got some praise on something you had written and who it was and what they said?
My folks were enormous influences as far as my writing, and to this day my dad still reads everything that I write and has offered generally positive feedback. Not always, sometimes it's constructive criticism, but he's said on multiple occasions how proud of the work he is of my work, and how he genuinely enjoys reading what I write, which is always a driving force for me. And I look at it like, if no one else enjoyed it, I enjoyed writing it, and at least one individual out there enjoyed reading it. The rest is just cream cheese.
And have you experienced the proverbial writer's block?
Oh yeah. I think anyone who would say otherwise is being disingenuous. There's no one who hasn't experienced writer's block. I would say that there are various calibers of writer's block, various degrees of severity of writer's block. I have been struck with all of them at various points. Sometimes it's a matter of the idea suddenly comes to me in the shower, and I know exactly how to wrap this up. I know how to move on to the next chapter. Other times I walk away from a book for a month or more. In fact, the Phaistos Paragon was written almost in its entirety a couple of years ago, and I just wasn't happy with where it was, and I put it aside and left it alone for 6 months. And then something happened where I watched a film, or I read a book that inspired me to come back to it, and I rewrote certain parts, I added more parts to it, and I got to where I actually really enjoyed it. So sometimes it's a matter of just a day, sometimes it could be a very long time. So I tend to have multiple works going on at once, and that helps me to jump and switch tracks. If I'm having trouble getting through one point on a given novel, I'll move on to another, and sometimes that'll help shake things up and change my mental state.
I was kind of hoping you were going to say heavy drinking is the key.
I didn't want to say that outright, but you know, it doesn't hurt.
Well, let me ask you about humor. You and I had a discussion just a few moments ago about humor.
How funny.
Isn't that funny? It was what humor is. And you're really good at it. I mean, some people overdo it, some don't. And you had started to discuss the idea of, you know, using it not just as a spice, but as the main course. Because right now, it's the spice in the story. It really makes you love the characters immediately because they're smart and they're witty, so it's funny. And there's a really nice banner. But, you know, what are your plans to maybe go the other way, and that humor is now the main part, and you're just going to go totally crazy?
It's interesting you say that, because that really is the next idea for me, the next step. Historically, I've tried to change up the books that I've written. Each one I've written is a little bit different, whether it's, I would classify most of them as thrillers. There's at least thriller aspects to everything that I've written so far, but that's not to say that you could easily classify or categorize all of them in the same way, because they are fairly diverse. And I do that intentionally because it makes it interesting for me. It proves a challenge. To every single time I write a book, I take a different approach. I try a marginally different style. But the next book in the works is going to be much more heavily emphasizing humor. And what I'm finding is that it's very easy to be funny briefly or periodically. It's a whole lot different when you need to keep it funny the entire time and keep the reader laughing at every turn. So I'm still working through that, and I'm learning. I'm developing my skills in that regard. But I just find that injecting humor, adding that little bit of levity, really helps any book to stand out a little bit. It makes any book a little bit easier to take, and it doesn't take itself too seriously. It's easy for, especially in the genre in which we write, books tend to be very serious. It's the end of the world. Somebody's found a virus that's going to end the world, or somebody's got a nuke, or name any of the tropes. They tend to be very serious, and you have someone who's trying to stop this. So without humor to add certain amounts of levity at points where the reader actually gets fatigued with the constant heightening of the suspense and the risks continue to grow, you have to inject a little bit of humor just to give them a minute of peace, just a minute of, that was funny. You know, that was actually pretty funny. I find as a reader that it's very important to my enjoyment of a book, so I try to deliver that as a writer too.
Do you think your writing style reflects what, you know, the type of conversations and banter that took place in your home when you were a kid? Or do you find, boy, I'm kind of more serious than my parents were, or I'm more funny than they didn't really seem to laugh a lot?
We had a very funny household. Everybody had a very good sense of humor. I would say that the kind of humor I tend to inject in my writing is probably not what I would consider the kind of humor I had growing up. Certainly not what I expected from my parents. And there are still times where I hand a book off to my mom, who hands it off to my grandmother, and I just cringe. You know, there are things in there that I just don't want them to think. You know, I don't want them to hear me saying it. So there's still that aspect, but they definitely instilled in me a sense of humor and to not take myself too seriously, which I think is a vital skill to have throughout anything, whether it's business or personal relationships. Just having a certain degree of humor in all things, it can be good for you.
And what type of journalism do you find yourself doing most frequently?
I have stepped away from journalism as my full-time job. I worked as a magazine editor for several years for a prominent publisher in Des Moines, and I'm currently working as a marketing communications coordinator, which is in a similar vein. I'm still doing a great deal of writing, but the journalism, I still do some freelance periodically, and I actually find that writing hard news delivers the best sense of accomplishment for me. I still think that, and this little departure from what we're talking about here in terms of fiction, hopefully, right, you hope that fiction and hard news don't go together too hand in hand, but I find that it's very satisfying to me to be a part of delivering news to people who can make an educated opinion from that. And it's good to keep your skills sharp. I find it's a different style of writing, obviously, from long form. Definitely different from writing fiction, but having that versatility, it contributes a certain balance, I think, to my being a writer just in general.
All right, you're 75 years old, you're retired. What kind of books are you going to be writing? The same stuff, or you see something else coming?
I couldn't say because from year to year it seems to vary. I like reading the books that I write, or I like reading those kinds of books, I should say. Usually when I've written a book, it goes away, and I don't ever want to talk about it again. I don't want to read it again because I have spent so many sleepless nights trying to figure out how to make it move just the way I want. I've become agonizingly familiar with all the ins and outs of every character. But yeah, as far as the actual novel writing when I'm 75, I couldn't say, but I have a feeling I'll still be doing it, and I hope, and I've said this many times to folks in my network, I hope that when I reach that point where I'm on my deathbed, I hope that there's still that one book that I thought may be incomplete that was going to be my best work. I always want to feel like I haven't written my best work, and I want to show improvement on every single book that I write. And the point at which I've reached a comfortable point, and I think that it doesn't get any better than this is my best work, I think that's, for one, disingenuous for anyone to say that, because you should always feel as though I could do better. And I'm hoping to continue that.
Okay, so we know the big news.
Yes.
But there's something that is going to happen this month that probably makes this month even more special. Tell us about that, Nate.
Yeah, I had to ask special permission to be here, given that my wife is very pregnant with our second child, a boy who is due out on the 25th of October. So we've got a couple of weeks. It could be any day.
I heard you're going to name him Paragon.
We'll have to negotiate that a little bit, maybe massage that one a little bit.
So, at the risk of being trite and asking you how you feel, because we all probably know you're happy that you have won, of course. But is this inspirational? Is this help move you along the road and get to the next book and all that? Just tell us maybe about that.
Absolutely. I think it's mostly validating. I mean, it's excellent to hear people comment positively about your work. This just kind of puts a name to it, and it really is validating. The networking, though, that regardless of whether I've won this or not, the networking opportunities I've had since I've been here have been absolutely priceless. And I'm very thankful for those opportunities.
Do you think you'll be entering some more competitions going forward as well?
We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. I don't know. This one sets the bar pretty high.
Well, let me ask you, is there anything else you want to say?
Just that I'm very appreciative for the opportunity. I think what you guys are doing here is very unique, and it has given me an opportunity to showcase my work and have people who are enthusiasts and champions for adventure writing read my work, give me positive feedback. It's been extremely validating, and I genuinely appreciate that.